When Alex Roberts, a black CEO, hears rumors of discrimination in his thriving consulting firm, he makes a bold decision to go undercover as an intern to expose the truth. What he discovers isn't just bias, it's betrayal by his closest confidants. Will he succeed in transforming the culture he built, or will his revelations destroy everything he's worked for? Before we get started, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more exciting content, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now let's dive in. Alex Roberts, the dynamic CEO of Insight Consulting, prided himself on being a trailblazer. He was a rare example of a black leader in an industry dominated by stereotypes and closed doors. The company he had built was widely regarded as a success story, symbolizing diversity and inclusion in a rapidly evolving market. Yet, beneath the polished surface, whispers of discrimination had begun to tarnish the image he had worked so hard to create. A few weeks earlier, Alex received anonymous messages, first through emails, then handwritten letters slipped under his office door. Each message had a similar theme: complaints of racial bias, allegations of unequal treatment, and stories of employees feeling sidelined based on their ethnicity or gender. Alex had always believed in leading by example, ensuring a fair and inclusive environment, but these allegations suggested otherwise. Doubts crept into his mind. Had his leadership style become too distant? Were people hiding the truth from him? To uncover the truth, Alex devised a plan. He would go undercover. He knew it was risky, but he needed to see the reality of the situation himself, without the filter of his CEO status. He adopted a new identity, Nate Brown, an eager and unassuming entry-level intern. He traded his tailored suits for casual attire, his luxury car for public transportation, and his private office for a small desk in a shared workspace. On his first day as Nate, Alex felt a wave of unease. The company he had built felt strangely different from this angle. His colleagues, now seeing him as a nobody, were polite but distant, their smiles lacking warmth. He noticed how the receptionist's demeanor shifted when a senior executive walked by, suddenly attentive, her smile brighter. When it was his turn to ask for help, she barely glanced up from her phone. Alex soon realized that the subtle biases went beyond simple social interactions. In meetings, his ideas were often brushed aside, even when they were the same ideas that would later be applauded when presented by others. A sense of invisibility began to settle over him, not because of his rank, but because of assumptions about who he was. One afternoon, while having lunch in the crowded break room, Alex overheard a conversation among a group of mid-level managers. Their jokes, though veiled, were tinged with stereotypes about different racial groups. He watched as some employees laughed awkwardly, while others remained silent, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. It was then that Alex understood the depth of the issue. It wasn't just about direct acts of bias, but a culture of complacency that allowed these behaviors to go unchecked. By the end of the week, Alex was emotionally exhausted. He found himself sitting alone in the break room, pondering the irony of his situation. He had created this company to be a beacon of change, yet here he was, experiencing the very prejudice he had sought to eliminate. He went home that night with a heavy heart, feeling both betrayed by his own creation and fiercely determined to address it. The days that followed were filled with more unsettling discoveries. As Nate, Alex began to navigate the daily grind of being an entry-level employee, experiencing firsthand the silent barriers that minority workers faced. He witnessed instances of subtle discrimination, Latina employees often assigned to support roles despite their qualifications, black workers being excluded from important projects, and female colleagues routinely talked over during meetings. Maria Sanchez, a driven and highly capable analyst, caught Alex's attention early on. She was bright and articulate, with a keen eye for detail. Yet, her voice was frequently ignored, and her contributions were often overshadowed by male colleagues who seemed to take credit for her ideas. Maria, despite her frustration, maintained a professional demeanor, but it was evident that the bias was wearing her down. One afternoon, during a team brainstorming session, Maria presented a well-researched proposal to improve client outreach. Her idea was logical, cost-effective, and potentially transformative. Alex watched as the manager nodded politely but shifted the conversation to a less competent suggestion made by another employee. The dismissal was so routine that it seemed almost normal, except that it wasn't. Maria's resilience became a source of inspiration for Alex, who found himself wanting to help her in more ways than just moral support. During a break, Alex Nate approached her, initiating a conversation. Maria was cautious at first, but soon began to open up. "It's not that I don't try," she explained, her voice tinged with wariness. "It's just that no matter what I do, I'm always seen as less capable." Alex felt a deep pang of empathy as he listened. He wanted to reveal his true identity and promise Maria that things would change, but he couldn't risk exposing his cover. Instead, he offered encouragement. "Don't let them define your worth," he said, hoping his words would resonate. As Alex continued to observe, he realized that the problem extended beyond just Maria. Other minority employees shared similar stories of being undervalued, overlooked, and sidelined for promotions. There was a palpable sense of frustration among them, but also a sense of resignation, an acceptance that this was simply the way things were. One evening, as Alex Nate was leaving the office, he overheard a group of employees joking about the so-called diversity hires. The comments stung, not just because of their content, but because of the casual tone in which they were delivered. These were not isolated incidents, but rather part of a broader culture of exclusion that had taken root within the company. By the end of this chapter, Alex felt a mixture of anger, guilt, and determination. He understood that this was not just about changing policies or issuing a public statement. It was about uprooting a deeply ingrained mindset. The question that lingered in his mind was how to initiate change without losing the trust of those he was trying to protect. As Nate, Alex's investigation began to expose unsettling truths not only about the general work culture, but about individuals he once trusted implicitly. Tim Patterson, one of Alex's oldest friends and a key executive at Insight Consulting, had been instrumental in helping Alex build the company from the ground up. Tim had always portrayed himself as a champion of diversity, often speaking publicly about the importance of fair and equal opportunities. Yet, under the surface, Alex started to see another side of him. It began subtly. During meetings, Tim's comments, though often framed in corporate jargon, seemed to favor a select group of employees, mostly white, mostly male. The implicit bias was evident. More attention given to their ideas, more patience extended to their mistakes, and more opportunities for mentorship. Meanwhile, Tim's behavior toward minority employees was more condescending. He would praise their efforts in a tone that felt more patronizing than sincere. One morning, Alex Nate attended a closed-door meeting about promotions. Tim led the discussion, speaking enthusiastically about potential candidates. As the conversation shifted toward Maria Sanchez's promotion prospects, Tim's demeanor changed. "She's got talent," he admitted, "but she's not exactly leadership material. A bit too emotional, I'd say." Alex felt a wave of anger rise within him. This comment wasn't just an opinion, it was a clear example of a biased perception that unfairly labeled assertive women of color as overly emotional. For the first time, Alex struggled to maintain his composure. He was not only confronting a systemic issue but a personal betrayal. How could Tim, someone he had trusted implicitly, be part of the very problem Alex was trying to solve? Alex felt the weight of guilt pressing down on him, realizing he had inadvertently allowed these biases to go unchecked for so long. His own distance from the daily workings of the company had created a blind spot, and Tim had taken advantage of it. In private, Tim was even more candid. One day, as Alex Nate was passing by Tim's office, he overheard a conversation that made his stomach turn. Tim was speaking with another senior manager, discussing the company's diversity efforts. "I know we have to tick the boxes," Tim said dismissively, "but let's be real. Most of these hires aren't exactly top-tier material." Alex felt a mixture of rage and disbelief. It wasn't just about the insensitivity of Tim's words. It was the fact that this mindset was coming from someone he had considered a friend and ally. Alex realized that the issues within the company weren't merely cultural. They were being actively maintained by people in positions of power. Determined to confront Tim, Alex Nate arranged to have a casual one-on-one conversation. In this meeting, Alex subtly challenged Tim's views, trying to understand his rationale. Tim's response was defensive. "Look, it's not personal," he insisted. "It's just about finding the best people for the job." The casual dismissal was infuriating, but Alex kept his cover intact. He needed more than just confrontations. He needed undeniable proof of the discriminatory practices to make a real impact. Meanwhile, Alex Nate continued to interact with other employees, gathering more personal stories of prejudice. He documented instances of unfair treatment, biased language, and discriminatory decision-making processes. He also found evidence of skewed hiring practices, with job requirements seemingly designed to favor certain demographic groups over others. Late one night, Alex sat alone in his small apartment, reviewing the data he had collected. It was overwhelming, not just in volume, but in the sheer breadth of the injustice. There were emails with discriminatory language, reports showing a clear disparity in promotions, and even video recordings of meetings where biased decisions were made. Alex felt a mixture of sadness and anger, realizing that this was not merely a professional problem, it was a deeply personal one. To make matters worse, Tim's behavior towards Maria was becoming more overtly negative. In one meeting, Maria presented an innovative idea for client engagement. Tim immediately shot it down, citing vague reasons about budget concerns, only to later support a similar idea from a male colleague. The double standard was glaring, and Alex Nate could see the hurt in Maria's eyes. It was then that he realized he couldn't remain passive any longer. Maria's struggles were representative of so many others in the company, and Alex knew he had to act, even if it meant putting his undercover efforts at risk. By the end of this chapter, Alex's feelings of betrayal had reached a breaking point. The very person he thought he could trust was contributing to the toxic culture he was trying to dismantle. The stakes were higher now, not just for the company's future, but for Alex's personal sense of integrity. He could no longer watch silently as the values he believed in were compromised by those closest to him. The realization that change would require confronting not only the broader system but also his old friendships was painful. Yet, Alex's determination was stronger than ever. He knew that the only way forward was to expose the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or challenging it might be. The next steps would be critical. He had to prepare for a confrontation that would not only change the company, but could also redefine his relationships and sense of self. The weight of Alex's discoveries began to gnaw at him. He had gathered enough evidence to prove that discrimination and bias were woven into the fabric of his company, not just through individual actions, but through policies and culture itself. Yet, what troubled him most wasn't just the systemic bias. It was the realization that his longtime friend Tim, someone he had trusted for years, was deeply complicit in fostering this toxic environment. Determined to act, Alex, still posing as Nate, decided to approach HR with the evidence he had collected. He carefully documented everything: emails with racially insensitive language, patterns of exclusion in promotion decisions, and personal testimonies from employees like Maria. He hoped that this would be enough to trigger an internal investigation, or at the very least, a serious conversation about changing the company's culture. But when he presented the evidence to HR, the response was nothing short of infuriating. "We're aware of some concerns," the HR manager said, her tone flat and dismissive as she glanced through the documents Alex had handed over. "But we're confident in the fairness of our processes." Alex tried to press the issue, pointing out the clear patterns of discrimination in the hiring and promotion data, but the HR manager simply shrugged. "These things are complicated, Nate," she said with an air of indifference. "We're doing our best to address diversity, but not every complaint is valid." The subtle way she brushed off his concerns, coupled with the bureaucracy that had clearly entrenched itself in the company, sent a wave of anger through Alex. He realized that HR wasn't going to fix this problem. They were part of it. The culture of indifference toward bias and discrimination had seeped into every level of the company. His frustration grew, but so did his resolve. If the system wouldn't change from the inside, Alex knew he had to take bolder action. In the meantime, Maria was continuing to face increased pressure at work. Her ideas were still routinely dismissed, and despite her significant contributions, she remained stuck in the same role with little recognition or support. Alex had stayed close to her during this time, offering quiet encouragement whenever he could, though he still hadn't revealed his true identity. Then came the moment that pushed Alex to the brink. Maria had submitted a proposal that outlined a new strategy for securing a high-profile client. Her idea was innovative and well-researched, and it had the potential to bring in significant business for the company. But when it came time to present the proposal in front of the executive team, Tim shot it down before she could even finish speaking. "This isn't going to work," Tim said, cutting Maria off mid-sentence. "We've tried similar things before, and it didn't pan out. We'll stick with the current approach." Alex watched the light drain from Maria's face as Tim dismissed her, his words cold and final. It wasn't just the rejection. It was the casual way in which her hard work had been discarded without a second thought. Alex knew then that he couldn't stand by any longer. At that moment, sitting in the meeting room as Nate, Alex made a decision that would change everything. In the middle of the meeting, as Tim continued to discuss other matters, Alex stood up. His heart pounded in his chest, but he knew what he had to do. "Excuse me," he said, his voice loud enough to capture the attention of everyone in the room. "I have something to say." The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward him, confused and slightly irritated by the sudden interruption. Tim frowned, clearly annoyed. "What is it, Nate?" he asked, barely concealing his impatience. Alex took a deep breath. "Maria's proposal deserves to be heard," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "And frankly, there's something seriously wrong with the way decisions are being made around here. You're dismissing ideas based on who presents them, not based on their merit." Tim's face darkened. "That's not your place to say, intern," he replied coldly. "We make decisions based on what's best for the company." "Is it?" Alex shot back, his voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're making decisions based on bias and prejudice. And I'm not just talking about Maria. I've seen it happen time and time again. Talented people being overlooked, marginalized, and pushed aside because they don't fit into your idea of what leadership should look like." The tension in the room became palpable. Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while Maria's eyes widened in surprise. Tim looked livid. "You're out of line, Nate," he said, his voice cold and clipped. "I don't know who you think you are, but you don't understand the bigger picture here." That was when Alex decided it was time to reveal the truth. "I understand more than you think, Tim," Alex said, his voice firm. "Because I'm not just some intern. I'm Alex Roberts, and I've been undercover in my own company for the past few weeks." The room erupted in stunned silence. Tim's face turned pale, and the other executives stared at Alex in disbelief. Maria looked at him, her expression a mixture of shock and confusion. For a few moments, no one spoke. Then, finally, Tim found his voice. "Alex," he said, his tone carefully controlled. "What is this? What are you trying to do?" "I'm trying to fix the company I built," Alex replied, his voice unwavering. "I went undercover because I wanted to see firsthand what was happening in this organization, and what I've found is unacceptable. There's bias, there's discrimination, and it's coming from the very top." The revelation sent ripples through the room. Some of the executives looked panicked, others angry. Tim, however, remained defiant. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice tight with anger. "You're making wild accusations based on what? A few conversations? You don't know how things really work." "I've seen enough," Alex countered, his tone sharp. "And I have evidence to back it up. Emails, reports, testimonies from employees who have been sidelined and discriminated against. This company is broken, Tim, and it's time to fix it." At that moment, Alex turned to Maria, who was still in shock from the revelation. "Maria, your ideas are good. You've been overlooked and disrespected, but that ends now. I'm not going to let people like Tim keep you from succeeding." Maria blinked, still processing the situation. For the first time, she seemed to realize that Alex had been watching out for her all along, not just as Nate, but as the CEO. Tim's face twisted with fury. "You think you can just walk in here and accuse me of—" "I'm not accusing you of anything, Tim," Alex interrupted. "I'm stating facts, and now we're going to deal with it." With that, Alex ended the meeting, leaving the room in stunned silence. The truth was out. There would be no going back. The revelation of Alex's true identity sent shockwaves through the entire company. Employees were stunned to learn that the entry-level intern who had been silently observing them was, in fact, the CEO himself. News of Alex's undercover operation spread quickly, causing a mix of outrage, confusion, and curiosity. Some felt betrayed by Alex's deception, while others viewed it as a bold move to bring about necessary change. The fallout was immediate. Alex called an emergency company-wide meeting the next day, determined to address the entire organization. As he stood on the stage, he looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some new, and many reflecting a complex mix of emotions. His voice was clear, but his eyes were somber as he began. "I know many of you are confused and probably angry," Alex said, addressing the crowd directly. "I don't blame you. What I did wasn't conventional. I pretended to be someone I'm not, and I infiltrated my own company to uncover the truth. I understand if you feel deceived, but I want you to know why I did it." The audience listened in tense silence as Alex continued. "When I started Insight Consulting, I had a vision of a company that represented opportunity, fairness, and diversity. But somewhere along the way, things changed. I began receiving complaints, hearing rumors of discrimination and bias within our walls. I couldn't ignore it, but I also couldn't address it from the top without knowing the reality on the ground. So I went undercover." Alex paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. "What I discovered was deeply troubling. Bias is not just present here, it's embedded in our culture. Talented employees have been overlooked, marginalized, and unfairly treated because of their race, gender, or background. I saw it happen with my own eyes, and I realized that this problem is bigger than any one person. It's systemic." As Alex spoke, he noticed a shift in the room. Faces that had been skeptical now looked more thoughtful, and some employees even nodded in agreement. He felt a sense of cautious hope. "Effective immediately," Alex announced, "we're making significant changes. We'll be implementing mandatory diversity training for all employees, starting with the executive team. Hiring and promotion criteria will be restructured to ensure that they are transparent and based purely on merit. We will establish a safe channel for employees to report discrimination, and retaliation of any kind will not be tolerated." The announcement was met with a mix of murmurs and applause. Alex's commitment to tangible changes seemed to resonate with many, but he knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to rebuild trust, both in the company and among his employees. In the weeks that followed, the company underwent a transformation. The new initiatives were rolled out, with Alex taking an active role in leading diversity workshops and meeting with employees one-on-one to hear their stories. He also introduced a mentorship program that paired senior executives with junior employees from diverse backgrounds, ensuring that their talents were recognized and nurtured. Tim, meanwhile, was asked to step down from his role. It was a painful decision for Alex, but a necessary one. Tim's dismissal sent a clear message. Accountability was not negotiable, even for those in the highest positions. The news of Tim's departure was met with mixed reactions. Some saw it as justice, while others viewed it as harsh. But Alex knew it was the right step toward creating a culture of genuine inclusion. Maria's journey took a turn as well. With Alex's support, she was promoted to a senior analyst position, finally receiving the recognition she had earned. Her proposal, the one Tim had dismissed so easily, was revisited and implemented, resulting in significant business growth for the company. In a private meeting with Alex, Maria expressed both her gratitude and lingering skepticism. "I appreciate everything you've done," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "But I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all. I mean, why go to such lengths? You could have just made changes from the top." Alex nodded, understanding her confusion. "I know it seems extreme," he admitted, "but I had to experience it myself, to truly understand the barriers that people like you face every day. I couldn't fix a problem I didn't fully grasp, and now that I do, I'm committed to making sure it never happens again." Maria studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you," she said, "but it's going to take time for trust to rebuild. Not just with me, but with a lot of people here." Alex smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "I know," he replied, "and I'm prepared to do whatever it takes, for as long as it takes." Despite the progress, not everyone was ready to embrace Alex's new approach. Some employees remained skeptical, questioning whether the changes would last or if they were merely a temporary fix to appease the situation. Alex understood their hesitation. Years of ingrained prejudice couldn't be erased overnight. But he remained committed to the path of transformation, believing that consistency and accountability would eventually win over even the most skeptical hearts. In a symbolic gesture of solidarity, Alex removed the luxurious perks that had once separated the executive team from the rest of the staff. The private dining rooms and exclusive access areas were replaced with open spaces where employees, regardless of rank, could interact freely. He also made a point of regularly engaging with employees at all levels, joining them for lunch and taking part in everyday activities. It was a small step, but it was a visible one. As months passed, the company began to show signs of true change. Employee satisfaction rates increased, turnover decreased, and more diverse candidates began applying for roles. Alex remained at the forefront of this transformation, actively participating in the company's growth and learning from his own missteps along the way. The final scene of the story takes place at an all-staff event celebrating the company's most successful quarter to date. Alex stood before the audience, no longer the imposing CEO, but a leader who had reconnected with the people who made his company thrive. As he concluded his speech, he invited Maria to the stage. With a wide smile, she joined him, symbolizing not only her personal triumph, but the broader shift in the company's culture. "We've come a long way," Alex said, his voice full of emotion. "But this is just the beginning. We'll continue to grow, to learn, and to support each other, no matter our backgrounds or differences. Together, we can build a company that truly represents the values we claim to hold." The crowd erupted in applause, with a sense of genuine optimism filling the room. Alex looked around, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The path had been difficult, but it was worth it. He had confronted darkness, within the company, within his relationships, and even within himself. And now there was light. The story ended on an emotional note, not with a perfect resolution, but with the promise of continued growth and healing. The journey of transformation, both for the company and for Alex, was far from over. But it was clear that a new chapter had begun, one grounded in empathy, accountability, and the belief that change, though painful, was indeed possible. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Click on the video now to watch. We appreciate your support, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.